Imagine celebrating your birthday, thinking you finally earned respect, only to have your own sister stand up in front of family, friends, and colleagues demanding every dollar of your hard-earned salary. The $9,000 I'd worked years to achieve became her target that night. What happened next shattered our family facade and ignited a revenge she never saw coming. This is how I exposed the truth about the golden child who tried to steal my success. My name is Rachel Monroe, and at 32 years old, I had finally achieved what I'd been working toward since I was 16, a position as a senior financial analyst at Midwest Capital Trust in Cleveland, Ohio, with a monthly salary of $9,000. The evening of my birthday party should have been a celebration of that achievement. But as I stood in my parents' backyard watching the fairy lights sway in the humid August breeze, I couldn't shake the familiar knot of anxiety that always formed when my family gathered. The backyard looked perfect, almost magical. Mom had strung those vintage Edison bulbs between the old oak trees, the same ones Dad had planted when we first moved to this suburban Cleveland neighborhood 25 years ago. The picnic tables were covered with red checkered cloths, laden with all the traditional dishes, Mom's famous potato salad, Dad's grilled corn on the cob, and the 3-layer chocolate cake that had been my birthday tradition since childhood. Everything appeared warm and inviting, exactly the kind of wholesome family gathering you'd see in a Hallmark movie. My colleagues from Midwest Capital Trust mingled with neighbors I'd known since elementary school. There was Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down, still wearing her signature pearl necklace even to a backyard barbecue, chatting with my supervisor, Marcus, about the unpredictable Cleveland weather. My best friend from college, Sarah, was helping Mom refill the lemonade pitcher, their laughter carrying across the yard. Even my usually reserved father seemed relaxed, flipping burgers at the grill while discussing the Browns' upcoming season with my Uncle Ted. But through it all, I felt my sister Lydia's eyes on me like ice picks. She sat at the far end of the yard, nursing what had to be her 4th glass of wine, her perfectly manicured nails, paid for by our parents, no doubt, tapping an agitated rhythm against the glass. At 35, Lydia still possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads, with her honey blonde hair and our mother's high cheekbones. But tonight, that beauty was marred by something darker, something that had been growing more pronounced over the past few months as my career ascended while hers stagnated. I tried to focus on the positive, on the genuine congratulations from my co-workers who knew how hard I'd fought for this promotion. They'd seen me pulling 12-hour days, studying for additional certifications on weekends, volunteering for the challenging accounts that others avoided. What they didn't know was that I'd been fighting for recognition much longer than my 5 years at the company. I'd been fighting for it my entire life, right here in this very backyard, where Lydia had always been the sun and I had been expected to be content as merely another planet in her orbit. "Rachel, honey, time for cake," Mom called out, her voice bright with the forced cheerfulness she always adopted when she sensed tension between her daughters. The crowd began to gather around the dessert table, where 32 candles flickered atop the chocolate masterpiece Mom had spent all morning decorating. As I walked toward the table, accepting congratulations and gentle pats on the back, I caught a glimpse of Lydia rising from her chair. Her movements were deliberate, calculated, like a predator that had finally decided it was time to strike. My stomach clenched with a premonition I couldn't quite name. This was supposed to be my night, my celebration, my moment to finally step out from the shadow she'd cast over my entire childhood. But as I saw her push through the crowd toward the center of the gathering, her chin lifted with that familiar air of entitlement. I knew that Lydia had other plans. The warm Ohio evening suddenly felt oppressive, the cheerful chatter of the party guests becoming a distant hum as I watched my sister approach. In that moment, standing in the backyard of my childhood home, surrounded by everyone who mattered in my life, I had no idea that my 32nd birthday would become the night everything changed, the night the facade of our family would finally crack, revealing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath the surface for decades. As I stood there watching Lydia approach, memories of our childhood came flooding back like scenes from a movie I'd tried desperately to forget. Growing up in the Monroe household meant understanding your role from an early age, and mine had been established before I could even spell my own name. I was the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who needed to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I remembered being 7 years old, coming home with a perfect score on my spelling test, running through the front door with the paper clutched in my small hands. Mom had glanced at it briefly, murmured, "That's nice, sweetie," before turning her attention back to Lydia, who was crying over a B- on her 4th-grade math quiz. That afternoon was spent consoling Lydia, with Mom calling the teacher to discuss unfair grading practices, while my perfect score lay forgotten on the kitchen counter, eventually buried under grocery lists and mail. The pattern repeated itself throughout our lives like a broken record nobody wanted to fix. When I made the honor roll in middle school, the celebration dinner was postponed because Lydia had been passed over for a solo in the school choir. When I won the district science fair in 9th grade, the trophy ended up in the hallway closet because displaying it might make Lydia feel bad about dropping out of her biology class. Every achievement of mine was minimized, hidden, or overshadowed by whatever drama Lydia had manufactured that week. The worst part wasn't just the lack of recognition, it was the active rewriting of history that happened in our house. Lydia's failures were always someone else's fault. The teacher who failed her didn't understand her creative thinking. The boss who fired her from the boutique was jealous of her beauty. The landlord who evicted her from her apartment was unreasonable about a few late payments. Meanwhile, my successes were attributed to luck, to being book smart but not street smart, or to having no social life to distract me. I learned to find validation elsewhere. Mrs. Henderson, my high school calculus teacher, became more of a cheerleader than my own parents. She wrote my college recommendation letters, attended my graduation when my parents couldn't make it because Lydia had a crisis that day, a fight with her boyfriend that required immediate family intervention. I still kept in touch with Mrs. Henderson. She'd sent a congratulations card when I got the promotion, something my own parents hadn't thought to do. College had been my escape. 4 blissful years at Ohio State where nobody knew I was Lydia Monroe's little sister. I could just be Rachel, the girl who tutored other students in statistics, who stayed up until 3 in the morning studying for the CPA exam, who worked 20 hours a week at the campus library to avoid taking money from my parents, money that always seemed to flow freely to Lydia for her various fresh starts and new opportunities. The unfairness of it all had carved something hard and determined inside me. While Lydia floated from job to job, relationship to relationship, always cushioned by our parents' emotional and financial support, I built my life brick by brick. Every scholarship application, every internship, every late-night studying while Lydia partied, they were all investments in a future where I wouldn't need anyone's approval or recognition. I thought achieving financial success would finally balance the scales, would finally make my parents see me as worthy of the same unconditional love they showered on Lydia. But standing there on my birthday, watching my parents' faces as they looked between their 2 daughters, concern for Lydia, casual acknowledgement for me, I realized some patterns were too deeply etched to ever change. The tragedy wasn't that they loved Lydia more, it was that they'd trained themselves to see her needs as more important, her feelings as more valid, her struggles as more deserving of support, and they'd trained me to accept it, to work around it, to succeed despite it. That training had made me strong, independent, and resilient. It had also left me perpetually feeling like an outsider in my own family, forever trying to earn a place at a table where my seat was always an afterthought. As Lydia reached the center of the gathering, her eyes glittering with something I recognized as dangerous, I realized that my success hadn't balanced anything. Instead, it had become just another thing for her to resent, another inequality for my parents to somehow correct in her favor. The distance between Lydia and me had never been more apparent than in the past year. While I'd been climbing the corporate ladder at Midwest Capital Trust, she'd been sliding down a spiral of her own making. The sales job at the luxury car dealership had lasted exactly 3 weeks. She'd quit because the manager didn't appreciate her innovative approach to customer service. The position at the high-end restaurant downtown ended after 2 months when she was caught giving away expensive bottles of wine to her friends. The assistant manager role at the trendy boutique in Beechwood Place Mall had seemed promising until she was let go for consistently showing up 2 hours late, claiming that creative people shouldn't be bound by rigid schedules. Each failure had been met with the same response from our parents: sympathy, excuses, and financial support. Dad had paid her rent for 6 months after the boutique incident. Mom had called in favors to get her interviews at places where her friends worked. They'd even bought her a new car when hers was repossessed, spinning it as an early birthday present to preserve her dignity. Meanwhile, I was still driving the used Honda Civic I'd bought myself 5 years ago with my signing bonus, a fact that seemed to escape everyone's notice. The tension had been building for months, particularly after my promotion was announced. Lydia had started making snide comments at family dinners. "Must be nice to have no life outside of work," she'd say. Or, "Some of us value experiences over money." Our parents would gently chide her, but there was always an undercurrent of agreement in their voices, as if my success was somehow evidence of a character flaw rather than years of dedication. Tonight, the tension was palpable. As the party progressed, I'd watched Lydia's mood darken with each congratulation I received. When Marcus had made a toast about my being the youngest senior analyst in the company's history, she'd actually snorted into her wine glass. When Mrs. Patterson mentioned how proud my parents must be, Lydia had muttered something under her breath that made Mom's face tighten with worry. The worst moment had come when my colleague Jennifer arrived late, apologizing profusely and explaining she'd just come from the office where she'd been implementing one of my strategic recommendations. "Rachel's proposal is going to save the company nearly $1 million this year," she'd announced to the gathered crowd. "She's absolutely brilliant." The backyard had erupted in applause, and I'd felt a rare moment of pure pride. Then I'd caught sight of Lydia's face, twisted with such naked envy that it took my breath away. Our parents, true to form, had immediately tried to deflect. "Both our girls are talented in their own ways," Mom had said quickly. "Lydia has such a creative spirit, and Rachel has always been good with numbers." The comparison stung, as it always did, reducing my years of hard work to being good with numbers while elevating Lydia's inability to hold a job to having a creative spirit. I noticed Dad pulling Lydia aside about an hour into the party, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. She was gesticulating wildly, her voice rising occasionally despite his attempts to calm her. I caught fragments. "Not fair," and "always about her," and "deserve more." The familiar refrain of Lydia's grievances, the soundtrack of my entire life. What struck me most was how isolated I felt at my own birthday party, surrounded by colleagues who respected me, neighbors who admired me, and family who was supposed to love me. I still felt like that 7-year-old girl holding a perfect spelling test, waiting for someone to truly see her achievement. The money, the title, the success, none of it had changed the fundamental dynamic. I was still the daughter who had to earn her place, while Lydia simply had to exist. As I watched Lydia shake off Dad's restraining hand and march toward the cake table where everyone was gathering, her face set with determination, I realized she wasn't just envious of my success. She saw it as a personal affront, a resource that had been unfairly allocated to the wrong sister. In her mind, twisted by years of entitlement and enablement, my achievement wasn't mine at all. It was something that should have been hers, would have been hers if the universe had been fair, if I hadn't somehow stolen it through my selfish focus on career over family, money over creativity, stability over adventure. The crowd had formed a semicircle around the cake table, their faces glowing in the candlelight, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. Mom was already starting to sing "Happy Birthday." her voice wavering slightly as she watched Lydia push to the front of the crowd. Dad stood frozen by the grill, spatula still in hand, his face creased with the kind of worry that had become his default expression whenever his daughters were in the same room. The singing faded into an uncomfortable silence as Lydia raised her hand, demanding attention like she was about to give a wedding toast. The wine glass in her other hand trembled slightly, but her voice was steady, clear, and loud enough for everyone in the backyard to hear. She wasn't drunk. I knew my sister well enough to recognize when she was perfectly, terrifyingly sober and had decided to burn everything down. "Before Rachel blows out her candles," Lydia began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I have an announcement to make. A family announcement." She turned to face me directly, and the look in her eyes made my blood run cold. This wasn't just envy anymore. This was something calculated, something she'd been planning. "You see, everyone here has been congratulating my little sister on her success, on her big salary, on being so accomplished." She drew out the last word mockingly. "But what you don't know is that success in the Monroe family comes with responsibilities. Real family takes care of each other. Real family shares their good fortune." Mom stepped forward, her face pale. "Lydia, honey, maybe this isn't—" "No, Mom, it's perfect timing." Lydia cut her off, her voice rising. "Everyone should know what kind of family we really are." She turned back to the crowd, which had grown eerily quiet. Marcus, my supervisor, had a confused frown on his face. Jennifer was frozen mid-sip of her drink. Mrs. Patterson's mouth had formed a small O of surprise. "From today forward," Lydia announced, lifting her chin with an air of triumph, "Rachel will be giving me her entire monthly salary, all $9,000 of it. Every single penny." She paused for effect, scanning the shocked faces around her. "That's what family does. We support each other. And since Rachel has been so fortunate while I've been struggling, it's only fair that she shares. Completely." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a plastic cup, and the sound of it hitting the patio seemed to echo like thunder. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, as Lydia continued her performance. "And if she refuses—" Lydia's voice turned harder, colder. "Then she's no longer welcome in this family. She can take her money and her success and get out. Forever." "Right, Mom. Right, Dad." Every eye in the backyard turned to my parents. Mom's hands were covering her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes, but she said nothing. Dad had moved closer but stopped several feet away, his face a mask of indecision and pain, but he said nothing. Their silence was more devastating than any words could have been. "You're insane," Jennifer whispered, breaking the spell. "You can't seriously be demanding your sister's entire salary." Lydia whirled on her. "This is a family matter. You wouldn't understand. Rachel knows what's right, don't you? Rachel—" She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with a mixture of desperation and vindictiveness. "All those years of being the perfect daughter, the successful one, looking down on me. Well, now's your chance to prove you actually care about this family." My colleagues were staring at me with a mixture of pity and horror. The neighbors who'd known us since childhood were backing away slightly, as if the family dysfunction might be contagious. Sarah, my best friend, had moved to stand beside me, her hand reaching for mine in support. "She's worked for that money," Sarah said firmly. "She earned it. You can't just—" "I can." Lydia screamed, and the mask finally slipped completely. "I'm the older sister. I'm the one who was supposed to be successful. She stole everything from me, every opportunity, every advantage, everything. The least she can do is pay me back." "I stole nothing from you." I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I worked for everything I have." "Worked?" Lydia laughed bitterly. "You buried yourself in books and spreadsheets and abandoned this family. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? With your fancy job and your sophisticated colleagues and your big salary? Well, choose then. Choose right now, in front of everyone. Give me the money you owe this family, or get out and never come back. The candles on my birthday cake had begun to drip wax onto the chocolate frosting, 32 small flames flickering in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the faces of everyone I'd invited to celebrate with me. My professional life and personal life had collided in the most spectacular way possible, and there was no taking any of it back. I looked at my parents one more time, still hoping for something: intervention, defense, even just acknowledgement of how insane this was. Dad opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Mom was fully crying now, but she made no move to stop Lydia, no move to defend me. Their passivity was their choice, and it told me everything I needed to know. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream or cry or throw the cake in Lydia's face, though God knows part of me wanted to. Instead, I did something that seemed to unsettle everyone more than any dramatic reaction would have. I smiled, a small, sad smile that I felt all the way down to my bones, and then I simply turned and walked away. Rachel. Mom finally found her voice, calling after me. Rachel, wait, let's talk about this. I didn't stop. I walked through the crowd of stunned party guests, past the gift table with its cheerfully wrapped packages, past the coolers full of drinks, past the lifetime of memories in this backyard that had never really been mine. Sarah tried to follow me, but I gently shook my head. This was something I needed to do alone. That's right. Run away. Lydia's voice followed me. Just like always, too good for your own family. Don't forget, you have until Monday to decide. The money or goodbye forever. My hands were steady as I got into my Honda Civic. Muscle memory took over, key in the ignition, seatbelt on, mirrors adjusted, normal movements while my world imploded. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror of my colleagues huddled together, probably trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. Jennifer had her phone out, likely already texting others about the unbelievable scene. By Monday, everyone at Midwest Capital Trust would know that Rachel Monroe's family had publicly demanded her entire salary. I drove through the familiar streets of Cleveland, past the elementary school where Lydia had been the star and I'd been the quiet kid in the back row, past the park where family picnics had always centered around Lydia's achievements or problems, past the church where Lydia had been the beautiful bride twice while I'd been the dutiful bridesmaid who helped pay for both weddings. The city lights blurred as I drove, not from tears, those would come later, but from a strange sense of disorientation. For 32 years, I'd accepted my role in the family ecosystem. I'd believed that if I just achieved enough, earned enough, proved myself enough, I would finally matter as much as Lydia. But tonight had shown me the truth in their eyes. My only value was in what I could provide for Lydia. My success wasn't mine to enjoy. It was a resource to be redistributed to the child they actually cared about protecting. I ended up at Edgewater Park, parking near the lake where I used to come to study during high school when home became too suffocating. Lake Erie stretched out before me, dark and vast under the cloudy night sky. The sound of waves against the shore was rhythmic, calming, real in a way that the performance back at the party hadn't been. Sitting there in my car, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The humiliation of being shaken down for money in front of my professional colleagues, the betrayal of my parents' silence, the rage at Lydia's breathtaking entitlement. But underneath all of that was something else, a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, the dynamics were completely clear. There was no more pretending that things might change, no more hope that my parents would suddenly see me, no more illusions about my place in the family. Lydia had done me a favor. Really. She'd stripped away all the polite fictions and revealed the ugly truth I was only valuable as a resource to be exploited. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts from Sarah, from colleagues, from numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off without reading any of them. Tomorrow I would have to face the questions, the pity, the awkwardness at work. But tonight, I needed to think. As I sat there watching the lake, memories flooded back. But this time I saw them differently. Every sacrifice I'd made, every achievement minimized, every time I'd accepted less so Lydia could have more. They weren't instances of family loyalty. They were training exercises in accepting exploitation, and I'd been an excellent student. But something had shifted tonight. The moment Lydia had stood up and demanded my salary, my entire salary, in front of everyone, she'd broken something that couldn't be repaired. She'd gambled on my usual compliance, on my need for family approval, on the patterns we'd established over 3 decades. She'd gambled that the threat of losing the family would be enough to make me surrender everything I'd worked for. For the first time in my life, rage, clean, pure, clarifying rage, began to build inside me. Not the suppressed frustration I'd carried for years, but something sharper, more focused. Lydia thought she'd won. She thought she'd backed me into a corner where my only choices were submission or exile. She was wrong. As I started my car and headed back toward my apartment downtown, a plan began to form in my mind. Lydia wanted to play games with public humiliation and family loyalty. Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who'd spent years studying strategy, analyzing risks, understanding leverage. I was the one with connections, resources, and most importantly, information. The Monroe family was about to learn what happened when they pushed their scapegoat too far. Sunday morning arrived with surprising clarity. I'd spent the night not crying, but planning. My dining table was covered with documents, bank statements, and printed emails, evidence I'd been unconsciously collecting for years, never knowing why until now. My laptop displayed multiple spreadsheets, the kind of detailed financial analysis I usually reserved for million-dollar corporate accounts. But this wasn't about money. This was about truth. The first call I made was to Robert Kellerman, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and whose daughter I'd tutored through her MBA program. He owed me a favor, and more importantly, he understood family financial exploitation. We met at his office that afternoon, despite it being Sunday. After reviewing the documents I'd brought, his expression was grim but unsurprised. "Your sister has been using your parents' credit cards without authorization," he confirmed, examining the statements I'd obtained through my mother's poorly protected online banking. She'd used my birthday as her password for years. These luxury purchases, the cash advances, this is fraud, Rachel. And from what you're showing me, she's also been claiming false dependents on her tax returns. I'd suspected as much. Lydia had listed our cousin's children as dependents for 3 years running, collecting refunds she wasn't entitled to. Our cousin lived in California and had no idea. Then there were the loans, small business loans she'd taken out using falsified documents, claiming to have a thriving online boutique that existed only on paper. 3 different lenders, $45,000 in total, all in default. "I don't want to press charges," I said carefully. "I just want documentation, official records that could be verified if someone were to inquire." Robert understood immediately. Leverage. The next step was more delicate. I reached out to 5 people from Lydia's past, former friends and romantic partners she'd borrowed money from and never repaid. Each conversation was sympathetic, careful. I wasn't asking them to do anything except write down their experiences. With dates and amounts, the response was overwhelming. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd been waiting for someone to finally hold Lydia accountable. Tom, her ex-fiancé from 3 years ago, was particularly helpful. "She took $8,000 from my mother," he said over coffee Monday afternoon. "Convinced her it was for our wedding venue deposit. There was never any venue. Mom's still too embarrassed to talk about it." By Tuesday, I had a file 2 inches thick, but documentation wasn't enough. Lydia had made this public, so the response needed to be public too. That's when I called in a favor from Marcus. So, you want to use the conference room for a personal matter? He asked, raising an eyebrow. A family financial intervention, I said smoothly. After what happened at my party, I think transparency is important. Some of the colleagues who witnessed that scene have been asking questions. I'd like to clear the air professionally. He agreed, probably out of morbid curiosity more than anything else. Word spread quickly through the office. Wednesday evening, the small conference room was set up with wine and appetizers, nothing fancy, just enough to make it seem like a casual gathering. I also sent personal invitations to select neighbors and family friends. Framing it as an important family announcement, Mrs. Patterson, still horrified by what she'd witnessed at my birthday party, immediately agreed to attend. Several others followed suit. I even invited my parents and Lydia, sending them a formal email that made it sound like I was ready to discuss Lydia's demands. The masterstroke was contacting Amanda Chen, not her real name, but the identity Lydia had been using on various online dating sites to scam men out of money. I'd discovered this particular scheme when I'd found charges on Mom's credit card to a photo studio that specialized in boudoir photography. A little digging revealed Lydia had been catfishing at least 6 men, promising to visit them if they sent money for travel expenses. Travel that never happened. I compiled everything into a presentation, not a PowerPoint. That would be too corporate. Instead, I created a simple photo album, each page telling a story: the credit card fraud, the tax evasion, the loan defaults, the personal betrayals, each documented, verified, undeniable. But the crown jewel was something I'd discovered only that morning. While reviewing old bank records, I'd found proof that Lydia had stolen my identity when I was in college. She'd opened 3 credit cards in my name, maxed them out, and only the fact that I'd been obsessively monitoring my credit score had allowed me to catch and fix it before it destroyed my financial future. I'd never told anyone, had quietly handled it myself, protecting her even then. But I'd kept the fraud reports, the police case number, everything. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, fitting weather for what was about to unfold. I stood in my apartment, looking at myself in the mirror. I wore my best business suit, the one I'd bought with my first bonus, the one that made me feel powerful and capable. My hands weren't shaking. My voice, when I practiced my opening remarks, was steady. I thought about calling the whole thing off a dozen times. This wasn't who I was. I was the good daughter, the quiet one, the one who fixed problems instead of creating them. But then I remembered Lydia's face at my birthday party, triumphant and cruel, so certain that she could take everything from me with impunity. She'd taught me an important lesson that night sometimes. Being good meant letting people destroy you, and I was done being destroyed. The conference room at Midwest Capital Trust had never felt smaller. By 7:30 that Thursday evening, it was packed with an unusual mix of my colleagues, neighbors, and at the center of it all, my family. My parents sat rigid in their chairs, confusion written across their faces. Lydia had arrived late, strutting in with the confidence of someone who thought they were about to collect their winnings. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the head of the table. My voice was calm, professional, the same tone I used when presenting quarterly reports to the board. "I know many of you witnessed an uncomfortable scene at my birthday party last Saturday. My sister made some serious demands, and I think it's only fair that everyone understands the full context." Lydia smirked, settling back in her chair. "Finally coming to your senses. Rachel." I ignored her and opened the photo album I'd prepared, sliding it toward the center of the table. "This is a documentation of financial patterns spanning the last 15 years. I think it's important that everyone understands what family support has looked like in the Monroe household." The first page showed credit card statements. "These are charges made on our parents' cards without their knowledge. Luxury handbags, spa treatments, vacation packages, over $32,000 in the last 3 years alone." Mom gasped. "Rachel, what are you—" "Page 2, I continued, my voice never wavering. "Fraudulent tax returns claiming children who don't belong to her as dependents. Federal crime. By the way, The IRS tends to take a dim view of this. Lydia's face had gone pale. You can't prove, page 3, loan applications with falsified income statements. 3 different lenders, $45,000, all in default. Page 4, this one's interesting. Screenshots from dating sites where Lydia has been posing under fake names, scamming men out of money for trips she never intended to take. The room was dead silent except for the sound of pages turning as the album made its way around the table. Jennifer from accounting was photographing every page with her phone. Marcus looked like he was watching a particularly gripping documentary. But here's my favorite, I said, pulling out a separate folder. Police report from 8 years ago. Identity theft. Someone opened 3 credit cards in my name when I was in college, maxed them out buying designer clothes and jewelry. Would you like to guess who that someone was? You said you wouldn't pursue that. Lydia stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't pursue it. I fixed it myself, protected you, protected the family reputation, just like I always have. I turned to address the room. Every time Lydia failed at a job, I helped cover her expenses. Every time she couldn't make rent, I paid it. Every time she destroyed another relationship with her lies and manipulation, I was the one who cleaned up the mess. And last Saturday, she decided that wasn't enough. She wanted everything. Tom, Lydia's ex-fiancé, stood up from where he'd been sitting in the corner. She took $8,000 from my mother, told her it was for our wedding venue. There was never a venue. There was never going to be a wedding. She was already planning to leave me for someone with more money. Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her usually gentle voice sharp with indignation. She borrowed $500 from me last Christmas, said it was for your father's medical expenses. But Harold Monroe never had any medical expenses. Did he? More voices joined in. Former friends, ex-boyfriends, neighbors, all sharing their stories of money borrowed and never returned, lies told, trust betrayed. The conference room had become a tribunal, and Lydia was shrinking with each revelation. Stop it, Mom finally cried out. Stop all of this. We're family. Family. I turned to face my mother directly. Family doesn't stand silent while one daughter publicly humiliates another. Family doesn't enable theft and fraud and call it love. Family doesn't demand that one child sacrifice everything they've earned to support another's refusal to grow up. Dad found his voice at last. Rachel, you don't understand. What Lydia needs is to face consequences for once in her life. I pulled out the final document. This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. If Lydia contacts me again, if she comes to my workplace, if she makes any attempt to extort money from me, I will pursue every legal avenue available. The identity theft alone carries a prison sentence. Lydia was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of being exposed, of finally being held accountable. You're destroying our family. No, I said quietly. You destroyed it the moment you decided I was nothing more than a bank account to raid. You destroyed it every time you lied, stole, and manipulated. I'm just refusing to be your victim anymore. I looked around the room at the faces of my colleagues, my neighbors, people who'd known our family for years. I wanted everyone to understand why I'm making this choice, why I'm walking away from the Monroe family. It's not about money. It's about finally admitting that some relationships are too toxic to save. The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia stood there, exposed and defenseless, her carefully constructed image shattered like glass on concrete. For the first time in her life, she couldn't talk her way out, couldn't charm her way past consequences, couldn't play the victim card because everyone in the room had seen the evidence of who she really was. You planned this, she whispered, her voice hoarse. You planned this whole thing to humiliate me. No, I said simply. You planned this when you stood up at my birthday party and tried to extort $9,000 a month from me. You planned this with every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every person you manipulated. I just made sure everyone saw the truth." Mom was sobbing quietly, but for once, they weren't tears of sympathy for Lydia. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing what she'd enabled for so many years. Dad sat with his head in his hands, looking every one of his 68 years. The golden child they'd protected and coddled had been revealed as a criminal, a fraud, a parasite who'd been feeding off everyone's goodwill for decades. Lydia looked around the room desperately, searching for one sympathetic face, one person who might take her side. She found none. Even our parents couldn't meet her eyes. The colleagues who'd witnessed her performance at my birthday party now understood exactly what kind of person she was. The neighbors who'd been her victims were finally vindicated. The ex-boyfriends she'd scammed sat with grim satisfaction. "I'm your sister," she said to me, as if that still meant something. "You were my sister," I corrected. "But sisters don't do what you've done. Sisters don't steal identities. Sisters don't demand their siblings' entire salary. Sisters don't weaponize family bonds for financial gain." She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and desperate. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." I held up the cease and desist letter. "Come near me again, and you'll be explaining all of this to a judge. And unlike Mom and Dad, judges don't accept tears as payment for crimes." Lydia fled then, actually running from the conference room, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. We could hear her sobbing in the hallway, the sound growing fainter as she escaped the scene of her complete and total exposure. My parents stood to leave, moving like they'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. Mom paused at the door, turning back to look at me. "Rachel, I know," I said quietly. "You did what you thought was best, but it wasn't best for me. It was never best for me." Dad finally spoke, his voice broken. "We failed you." "Yes," I agreed. "You did." They left then, and I knew it would be the last time I'd see them for a very long time, maybe forever. The price of my freedom was the loss of my family, but it was a family that had never truly been mine anyway. The room slowly emptied as people filed out, some offering words of support, others just nodding in understanding. Marcus squeezed my shoulder as he passed. "Takes guts," he said simply. Jennifer hugged me briefly. Mrs. Patterson kissed my cheek and whispered, "About time someone stood up to that girl." Soon, I was alone in the conference room, looking out at the Cleveland skyline as night fell over the city. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. Somewhere out there, Lydia was probably already spinning a new narrative, painting herself as the victim of her cruel, heartless sister. But it didn't matter anymore. The people who mattered knew the truth. I gathered my documents, my evidence of years of abuse and exploitation, and tucked them away. I wouldn't need them again. The revenge was complete, not in destroying Lydia, but in simply revealing her. The truth, it turned out, was the most devastating weapon of all. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Proud of you. Drinks tomorrow." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in days. Absolutely. Driving home through the familiar streets of Cleveland, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 32 years, complete and total freedom. No more family dinners where I was diminished. No more financial emergencies that were somehow my responsibility. No more watching my achievements be dismissed while Lydia's failures were excused. I was alone, but I was free. And for the first time in my life, that felt like winning. The next morning, I woke up to 37 missed calls from Lydia and 18 from my parents. I blocked all their numbers. The cease and desist letter had been delivered, according to my lawyer. Lydia had signed for it, then apparently had a meltdown in front of the delivery person. Life went on. Work continued. My colleagues treated me with a new level of respect, having seen me handle a personal crisis with professional grace. The story spread, as these things do, becoming something of a legend in our industry. Did you hear about Rachel Monroe exposed her grifter sister in front of everyone? Absolutely savage. I never saw Lydia again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Florida, trying to reinvent herself where no one knew her history. My parents sent a few letters, which I returned unopened. The family I'd lost had never really been mine to begin with. The family I chose, my friends, my colleagues, the people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. They were my real family. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member? How did you find the courage to break free? Your stories matter, and I'd love to hear them.